I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be looking at the best makeup and hair, costume design, and production design predictions. Like we did on Friday's episode, going to be combining a lot of these categories together, doing multiple videos a week in these next couple weeks because we're getting really close to Oscar season, and I want to do that so that I can still talk about the categories in depth like I have, while also doing some fun videos as well. So ultimately for you guys, so that you can understand my picks, my analysis. These are my predictions as of right now. That doesn't mean I'm locked in for them. I may change them later on, but what the purpose of it ultimately is to create an awesome community here on the channel, and just to give you an understanding of what are the contenders, what are the facts, what are some reasons why I do well, what are the reasons why I think it's going to get in, to ultimately make your own decisions. That's what we're here for. So I hope you enjoy the videos and stick along for the journey. But without further ado, let's jump into the best makeup and hairstyling category, with my first pick going to The Whale. Now, as we've been talking about for the past 7 seasons now, the makeup and hairstyling category is overwhelmingly become almost the best prosthetics category, particularly when it comes to the winners. That there is a direct correlation between the winner of this category and an Oscar nomination. Oftentimes an Oscar win in the acting category, or it could be something else. But for the most part, it's that connection between the best makeup category and the best acting, best actor, supporting actor, whatnot category. Gary Oldman wins for best lead actor, the makeup wins. Last year, Jessica Chastain wins for best actress, the makeup wins. And then even in years where the actor doesn't win, like a Christian Bale for Vice, it ultimately still wins for best makeup. Vice does. So there's a real strong connection with prosthetics and performances. So this year, Brendan Fraser is the frontrunner to win for Best Actor, in part because he transforms and has a lot of prosthetics and makeup on to sort of transform him into a 600-pound man, which he is not in real life. Now, there has been some controversy around that, but I think enough people will appreciate Brendan, his performance, and the movie in general to overcome that. And it's not like he's a really skinny Timothée Chalamet type. I mean, he still is a heavy man in and of himself. So I don't think that's going to totally factor in. Very simple. I think Brendan Fraser right now is going to win for Best Lead Actor. Therefore, I think The Whale will win in this category. So if it's going to win, it at least needs to get nominated. Then my second pick, I'm going to go to Elvis for a very similar reason to The Whale. In this case, transforming Austin Butler into Elvis, particularly more so when Elvis gets older, more of that kind of a transformation. He does the sort of younger stuff pretty well because he's a young man himself. But you know, there's a possibility, not a strong possibility, but a possibility that Austin Butler actually wins the Best Lead Actor award over something like a Brendan Fraser. And in that possibility, you would think, okay, Elvis would then win for Best Makeup. That's a strong possibility too. But regardless, even if Austin Butler doesn't win, we're pretty likely he's going to get nominated. And we often see people like Christian Bale, if they get nominated, the makeup will also get nominated as well. So I think because of that connection, Elvis, you have to get in for number 3, and then in my number 2 slot, excuse me, and then in my number 3 slot, I went with the Batman, this time transforming Colin Farrell into the Penguin. And this film, and particularly this makeup job, is really more face work than Elvis or The Whale are, you know, where you can still see that's Austin Butler, you can still see, you know, that's Brendan Fraser, but Colin Farrell really transforms into the Penguin. It's really well done in its execution, and I think that's been appreciated in many ways. And with, like I mentioned, the Christian Bale stuff or the Gary Oldman stuff, particularly that sort of facial prosthetics to transform them to look like someone, that's been really well appreciated. Now, the Batman isn't going to be a Best Picture contender like Elvis or The Whale. Even The Whale I don't think is going to get in for Best Picture, but it could get in for something like a screenplay, you know, in some of the other categories. The Batman may get a couple of other nominations. This may be its only nomination. This is the only one that I'm actually confident it will definitely get in. This is probably visual effects, but the movie was still broadly well celebrated. And in this category, I mean, we've seen movies like Suicide Squad win in the past. So quality isn't always the most important thing. But that being said, the Batman was critically well appreciated, so I don't think it's going to be hard for people to nominate. And the makeup, of course, is well done, particularly with Colin Farrell's character in The Penguin. Then in my 4th slot, I'm going to go with Babylon. It's just a movie that I've been confident in since day one. I think it's going to do very well in these technical categories. It has that strength of being, I think, a Best Picture contender and at least a Best Picture nominee, so people will like the film. And it has its sort of fervent, passionate fan bases. And when you think of the movie, if you haven't seen it already, it has particularly more so like not prosthetics but makeup, particularly with Margot Robbie's character. There's like this really sort of crazy, I would say, crying scene in which the makeup is very visible. She's got this sort of really distinct blue makeup in a portion of the film. There's all this sort of costumes and production design, really production design, costume design, makeup. They're all interconnected, which is why I combined them here in this video. So Babylon definitely has this sort of lavish production and large budgets and sort of makeup that's done within all the different characters, and the sort of grandiose and extravagance of that approach. And because the movie I think will be well liked, I think it is enough to put it in. Then in my final slot, I went with Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. The first movie did not get nominated for Best Makeup, but you have to remember that year it was still only 3 nominees. Recently, the Academy has broadened that to now have 5 nominees for Best Makeup and Hairstyling. So I think because of that, Black Panther will sneak in here. I think, you know, as I mentioned in Friday's video, Black Panther has been doing a little bit more, is a little stronger of a film than I expected. It's been doing better than I've expected. So I do think it will still compete in these technical categories. And whether it be sort of the traditional designs that was established in the first movie, or that guy with the really big lip with the disc in the middle, or the earrings of Namor, or his sort of nose bar. There's little sort of flourishes of makeup and hairstyling and just that sort of approach to, of course, establish that new Aztecian Atlantis type community in Telecon. And I think there will be appreciation there within the sort of the makeup and the hairstyling that was done to create these kind of unique people and cultures. Then in my possible contenders, my first one's going to go to Everything Everywhere All at Once. A movie that I think, if you think about it, actually has really strong technical elements, but I'm very sort of skeptical how well it would do. It did very well at the Critics' Choice Awards in the technical categories, but that was somewhat expected. This has always been a critics kind of a darling, even early on. That's the reason why it sort of sustained throughout, you know, being an early release and still competing at the Oscars. I don't think the Oscars are going to like Everything Everywhere All at Once as much as the Critics' Choice Awards did, but I still think they're going to like it, of course. So it's still a possible contender. And when you think about the movie and the multiverses and all the different sort of hair and makeup in the different worlds that particularly Michelle Yeoh has to go through, it is impressive. So it's right now on the edge because it's a strong film. There actually is strong technical craft. But my concern is that it's just not the most obvious technical craft when you think about it immediately, because it has just a smaller budget. And then my other possible contender in makeup is actually going to be Emancipation. This is a movie that sort of came and went in many regards, but it was at least campaigned and thought of around town as a potential Best Picture contender. I think Apple really does think of it as a strong movie, and they're going to campaign it, and they have been campaigning it. Of course, the Will Smith of it all is strange and weird, but they spent a lot of money on this film, and it does feel like an important kind of a movie, and those movies don't necessarily go away. You know, think of Emancipation like a movie like The Midnight Sky. You know, that's a movie that didn't get in for Best Picture, but they had high hopes for it, and they campaigned it, and they still got in one nomination. I think Emancipation will get in somewhere, whether it be cinematography, will it be in here, and the reason why I sort of consider it in this category is because of some of the lashings and the marks on Will Smith's character's back, the picture of which was sort of a real change in civil rights history in the States, when really people really were forced to view what the slaves were enduring. And you know, that's a historical kind of a piece of photography. Then they sort of recreated that with makeup in the film, and it's very sort of a jarring piece. And then of course the big action sequences and whatnot, and the blood and some of the scars that were required for the makeup department in that regard too, I think will be still potential to be well respected. Now transitioning over into my best costume design predictions, my first pick is going to go to Babylon. Once again, I've mentioned it. It's a huge, lavish, extravagant production with multiple different locations and many different dresses and suits and old Hollywood kind of a garb. So there's a period element to that, and dresses, which the costume design branch here really loves and appreciates period stuff, particularly, you know, the older you get. And this is, you know, almost 100 years old at this point now, at least when Babylon is set. And the work is done by Mary Zophres, who has worked with the Coen brothers and Damien Chazelle in the past and has been nominated multiple times, so there's a level of respect there, but she still hasn't won yet, so maybe this is the movie that she will finally win for. And when you think about Babylon, you know, every year, if you think Babylon's getting in for Best Picture, which I do, every year, almost every single Best Picture nominee gets some sort of win. And Babylon, I'm not necessarily sure where it's going to be. Could it be in production design? Could it be in costume design? Could it be in both? Who knows? But I do think it should be at least in contention of winning in one of these categories. That's probably the easiest way for the film to win. And I think that's why it has to be at least a top contender here in something like costume design, because of the lavish, expensive production, old Hollywood period garb, wonderful dresses. It just makes perfect sense for me. Then my second pick is going to go to Elvis, which is in a very similar situation to Babylon. The production design and costume design of Elvis was done by Catherine Martin, who was the spouse of Baz Luhrmann, and she's actually won 4 Oscars before. So she won twice for Great Gatsby and twice for Moulin Rouge. So there's a strong appreciation not only of nominations of Baz Luhrmann's films, but of winning in Baz Luhrmann's films. And Elvis does a similar thing. I mean, just the rapid pace of this film with so many different periods and eras, quick life of his life, and different costumes, different costume sets. Of course, you have Elvis, who has these iconic kind of jumpers or just sort of white tees. I mean, he has these super iconic outfits that were recreated for the film that are recognizable, that I think will be well appreciated. So Elvis is a strong movie with a lot of different costumes. Oftentimes the most costumes wins, and I think Elvis may have the most amount of costumes, but there's an appreciation of that there, and just the extravagance and grandiose style of Baz Luhrmann's films. Elvis fits into that mold, and I think that will be appreciated here at the Academy. Then in my third slot, I'm going to go with Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, which is once again designed by the great Ruth E. Carter, who finally won her first Oscar for Best Costume Design in the first Black Panther. So I think she's going to be well appreciated, at least again to get that nomination. As I mentioned, Black Panther is doing better than I expected, so I have sort of decided to increase it in my rankings. There is sort of still an appreciation for this MCU movie because I guess they nominated the last Black Panther, but of course there's still the wonderful designs of Wakanda, but then of course expanding that to the Talokan and the underwater city in the film, a whole new culture, and the costumes and sort of garb that they are wearing, does feel similarly sort of historical and culturally accurate, but also sort of a sci-fi Afrofuturist kind of a approach to it. Ruthie Carter really established a really interesting visual style within this film, and that sort of continuation I still think will be rewarded and appreciated, at least for a nomination once again here for costume design. Then my fourth slot, I'm going to go with Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, at Critics' Choice, Everything Everywhere All at Once did very well in terms of the technical awards, better than I thought in terms of costume design and production design. And, there was something about it where I went, okay, well, I don't think it's going to get in all of the nominations, just because I don't think it can compete with a movie like Avatar or Elvis, these big budget battle and these big budget type of movies, because it is still very much an indie and a small movie. So therefore it doesn't have as many costumes, doesn't have as much to show. But that being said, I still have it, particularly why I chose costume design over production design or makeup and hairstyling, why I think it's actually going to get in for this category, is because the costumes I think are a little bit more of the obvious example of the multiverses. I mean, Michelle Yeoh said it herself, her ability to sort of transform into the different costumes and things that she was able to do within the many different multiverses helped her sort of change her character. And when I think about sequences like the hot dog finger scene, or even the sort of Wong Kar-wai-esque inspired scene, the highlights of those scenes are not necessarily the production design. The production design, like it's in a hallway or they're in a room. The costumes are the interesting thing. The hot dog fingers are that interesting thing. The beautiful dress that Michelle Yeoh, the green dress that she wears, is the sort of element there. When she's the opera singer, it's the costume, it's the garb. That's what's the interesting thing about it. So when I think about the technical appreciation of Everything Everywhere All at Once, I don't think it's going to get in everywhere, just because it's going to be hard to compete against the bigger type movies. But I do think it will get into one of these categories, as seen by its overperformance at Critics' Choice. So ultimately, I wanted to go with one of the categories. I went with costume design. To me, that made the most sense, most likely chance of getting in. And then my final slot, I went with The Woman King, and the costume designer here, Gersha Phillips, did a terrific job at really creating these really interesting and intricate costumes in terms of the warrior battle outfits, while also trying to be historically accurate, which also sort of, they had their sort of unique outfits. That sort of squad wearing all the same sort of outfits, really adds to, I think, the sort of culture and strength of the believability within The Woman King. So I think there's going to be an appreciation of that. Now, generally, I've been a little bit more down on The Woman King. I don't think it's going to be this huge Best Picture contender, might concern me. That's a blockbuster, and the Oscars already have a blockbuster in Elvis, Top Gun, and Avatar. Do they really want another one? That's kind of rare for them, frankly. So I do think it's going to be on the outside of a lot of these categories. But costume design is one that I think it will get in, because it just makes sense in terms of how the film is constructed, the sort of world building of that world, and the costumes being so identifiable and unique and distinct. Then possible contenders. My first one is going to go to Blonde. There's something about Blonde that I can't shake. It's rare, frankly, that a movie that really contends for Best Picture, like Blonde was, to completely blank out. Certain movies that don't really go for it will blank out, but there's pretty rare where, even still, we'll see a movie like The Midnight Sky, I've mentioned before, but it will get nominated for a category. Ballad of Buster Scruggs was kind of an Oscar contender, and then it wasn't, but then it still sort of overperformed. Even if movies that haven't been the most well appreciated at the Oscar hopefuls that sort of failed, they still get some sort of technical appreciation. And so there's still something behind me that thinks Blonde, Marilyn Monroe, all the unique costumes that were designed for that, and the many different pieces and iconic outfits that were recreated, frankly, within the film with picture-perfect accuracy, I thought were very impressive, and I don't think that's going to be something that's totally overlooked. So I feel like, like a lot of people were surprised that Ana de Armas got a nomination for Blonde. I think a lot of people may be surprised if Blonde gets any nominations at the Oscars, but costume design, I think if it were to surprise anywhere, then don't be surprised if it gets in for costume design. And then my final possible contender is going to go to The Fabelmans, and this is done by a two-time Oscar winner, costume designer Mark Bridges. And I think a lot of people think, oh, hey, okay, Mark Bridges, Fabelmans, well-liked movie, slot it in. But the more you think about it, the more it actually has a less likely chance of getting in. Of course, he actually didn't even get in for costume design at Critics' Choice, so that hurts the Fabelmans' chances a little bit. But also, I think it's notable that Mark Bridges' last two movies, Licorice Pizza and News of the World, both didn't get in. And, the movies that he does get in for, something like Phantom Thread, have these obvious, lush, costume-forward kind of a costumes. But when we think of something like Licorice Pizza or something like The Fabelmans, they're just period garb. There's nothing necessarily jumping out at you that says The Fabelmans, wow, incredible costume design. It's a period piece, so there's appreciation there, especially because there's sort of middle-class family. There's not a whole lot of unique kind of costumes in that regard. It's sort of pretty basic, and I don't think that's going to be flashy enough to get in for a costume design nomination. Now, finally wrapping up the video with the Best Production Design category, my first pick is going to go to Babylon. Like I've been saying all video, very extravagant, lavish production in many regards. But not only are there many different costumes, but there's also many different sets and productions. And the movie is about making movies, so there's going to be an appreciation there. There is a sense of building sets and shooting things. There's also in this film a strong appreciation and a strong use of practicality. There's not a whole lot of CGI. There's scenes in which there are 700 extras. So when we look actually at past winners or past nominees, movies like Tenet or La La Land, or something like Nightmare Alley last year, these are all movies that have really large, big, practical sets that don't really use CGI. And when you're a production designer, you love that stuff because it's kind of rare. Very much, it's like, okay, let's build a certain amount of the set and then put green screen around it, and that's set extension, and we'll do that later on in post. But when you can actually have a huge carnival built, like in Nightmare Alley, or in, here in Babylon, where you can have these huge, lavish parties with a bunch of different extras and all this, real-life animals, there's a sense of realness and practicality that I think will be appreciated and respected amongst the production designers to get Babylon at least a nomination. And let's not forget La La Land won for Best Production Design. First Man, Damien Chazelle's last movie, got nominated for production design, so there's an appreciation of his films and those elements. Then my second pick is going to go to Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, which the first movie, Black Panther, actually won in this category for Best Production Design, so I think this movie will at least compete in a nomination sense. The same people working on it here again, and I think it's notable that, of course, you have Wakanda and the world that's being established there. There's a continuing of that mythology, of that lore that we're familiar with, which is, of course, so well done that it won last time, but there's so the continuing of that. But then there's also the introduction of Talocan, the underwater city that is introduced in the film, and their culture, which is based on sort of Aztec. So there's a appreciation there where it's like, not only are you extending Wakanda and that world, but you're also introducing a new world. And we've also seen sci-fi movies in the past do well with nominations and wins for Dune or Fantastic Beasts. We've seen these sci-fi movies do well in production design over and over again. Tenet, for example, undeniable. So I think that will continue here with another sci-fi nomination for Black Panther. Then my third slot, I'm going to give it to Elvis. As I mentioned in the costume design, this is actually also done in part by Catherine Martin, who's Baz Luhrmann's wife, and she won for Best Production Design for Moulin Rouge and for Great Gatsby, so she's well respected. There's many different, not only costumes, but different periods, different pieces, and because the movie is so quick at a rapid pace, you have to quickly understand, okay, we're in the 50s, okay, we're in the 60s, we're in the 40s, this is where Elvis is growing up. There has to be sort of these easily identifiable, show me one image and you know what era we're in, because we have no time to waste. And Catherine Martin does a really terrific job at really bringing those periods to life in sort of maybe generic ways where it's like, if you see this image, you immediately know we're in this era, but still effective in the sense of how the story is to be told. Then in my fourth slot, I went with The Fabelmans, and this is done by past Oscar winner Rick Carter, who has worked on a lot of Spielberg films, hasn't worked on the past couple, but the matter of the fact is that, The Fabelmans didn't get a nomination at Critics' Choice. So you may go, whoa, is The Fabelmans going to underperform in the technical categories? I don't think so, because frankly, I think it's the Best Picture frontrunner right now. And I don't think it's going to get in every above-the-line category, so it's going to get some technical categories to really perform and show that's a contender. And when we think of Steven Spielberg and we think of his past nominees, and his past serious Oscar movies, they almost always get nominated for Best Production Design. I mean, West Side Story did, Bridge of Spies did, Lincoln did, War Horse did. He just continually gets nominated in production design, most of the time because he's doing these period pieces. Now, The Fabelmans may not have the most obvious kind of Bridge of Spies-esque production design nod or Lincoln-esque production design nod, because it's a little bit more domestic, it's less showy. But that being said, I still have it in here because I think it's going to be a well-liked movie from a past Oscar two-time winner in Rick Carter, so appreciation there. A lot of Spielberg's movies have gotten nominated in the past, and there are sort of iconic, recognizable locations, whether it be the high school or the house or some of the film sets. There is some more appreciation, I think, more so than, say, costumes. There's some more appreciation and more depth in terms of the different productions and different sets that we see on The Fabelmans, so I think that'll be enough to push it over the edge. And then in my final slot, I went with Avatar: The Way of Water. Now, the first film actually won for Best Art Direction, so there's still some, I think, positive goodwill that, hey, this will at least get nominated. I am betting right now that Avatar will do very well in these technical categories just because of an appreciation for James Cameron and his work. Now, there's a little bit of a hesitation for me because so much of the production design is CGI and visual effects, and it's not like real and practical, which is kind of what this branch likes. But because they nominated the original Avatar and actually gave it the win, I think this should be enough to at least get the nomination. And they're still doing, Black Panther in terms of that's got CGI in it too, so they got appreciation of that too. But I think Avatar, just the technical scale and even the recency bias, that's the most recent thing they've seen, and they're going to be seeing it in the theater in optimal conditions. I think they're going to really appreciate the production design and the building of the world in a similar way that Black Panther will. Now, possible contenders. My first one's going to go to Glass Onion, which was a bit of a surprise contender until it actually sort of got nominated at Critics' Choice and became a serious contender. And when you think about it, it actually does make a lot of sense that most of the movie takes place on this island. The rooms are where a lot of the movie takes place. They're very kind of critical to the film and its locations, and there's just sort of course, the big glass onion on the island and just the sort of different pool parts of the island and whatnot. It's very sort of lavish and extravagant, so and location is very much a part of the story. If you've seen the film, you know what I mean. So there's that element too. So I think there's kind of an appreciation that if Glass Onion gets in for that 10th slot for Best Picture, don't be surprised if it gets a surprise nomination in something like production design. It very well could. And then my final possible contender is All Quiet on the Western Front. And as we've mentioned, as the Academy gets larger and larger and more international, we're starting to see these types of movies overperform and do well at the Oscars. And All Quiet on the Western Front is a big production for an international production. It has, of course, many different locations, and the brutalness of the trenches and that warfare. The production design is really in your face in that regard. And I do think there's going to be a strong technical appreciation for the film, so don't be surprised if this slips in. It's definitely a contender for sure. I just don't know how much of a contender, because is it really going to beat out a Best Picture winner in something like The Fabelmans or a big Hollywood movie like Black Panther Forever? Hard to say, but as the Academy becomes more international, it has more chances to nominate movies like this. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Another sort of quick week of videos. Last week I had a video on Friday. This week another video on Monday. We're going to be talking about the Oscar shortlist, which is going to be coming up later this week, Thursday, I believe. So watch for that video then for my reactions. Maybe these predictions will be mutt now that you know, the shortlists are coming out later in the week, but still I wanted to get this video out so it has its own sort of standalone value for later on in the season. So if you appreciate that kind of stuff, comment below, let me know your predictions, like the video, that kind of stuff always helps. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.